really subject matter experts and really understand the topics that we cover in the show deeply. So I'm incredibly happy to welcome Greg to the show. Hey, Greg.
Hey, how you doing?
Very good, very good. So, Greg, probably before we quickly talk about what we will cover today, just a very quick intro from you. What have you done in your life?
Hopefully I've done a lot by now at my age. But I'd say like the last 10 plus years been in advertising, head up the performance media team at Acronym Media, where my big focus has been in e-commerce and growing marketplaces such as on Amazon.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So Greg, yes, one of the big experts in the industry when it comes to advertising. A long history. Acronym has been there already for over 25 years, which is
25th anniversary.
25th anniversary. That's crazy. Which, for those of you that have followed the advertising industry, the digital advertising industry, it's pretty much since the birth, right? I would say it's even pre-Google time. What is crazy. So we'll talk a lot about advertising today. We talk today about advanced PPC strategies. So welcome to this. Just a couple of points. This show is also visible on YouTube. It's also on Spotify, right? So if you are joining us from any of these shows, please also are aware that you can ask questions. So the questions, if you're in the Zoom call, just add them here. And if you're on YouTube, just also add them there. It's an interactive show. So Greg and I will try to address all of the questions that you might have around the topics that we will discuss and cover today. And just to check that we also see that the chat and everything is working, if you could just quickly give us some sign of which city you dealt in today. So just type it in the chat so that I also can see that everything works. So you can just click on the chat button and type in the city. And we see, there we go, Salt Lake City, New Orleans, LA, Boston, Toronto. Here we go. Okay, now it gets going. Nashville, Chippenham. So many from the US, Burbank. All right, many folks from the US joining today. So welcome to the show, everyone. And I also see New Delhi, great. I also know that we always have a couple of people from India joining as well. More late there. UK, thank you. Europe also represented, that's great. So yes, we have a few people here. So I'm based in Berlin, and Greg?
I'm based in New Jersey, normally working out of New York City, but fun times, different times.
Cool. So yeah, we have an international audience, international show, and we'll talk today about advanced PPC topics. Before we go deeper into what we actually discussed today, one thing that we will now start to do, and if you've joined some of the last shows, you probably have seen this, we will ask you about which topics you would actually like to hear more in the future. The advertising space is such a big and complicated space. So everyone that is following Amazon has probably been amazed, as much as Greg and I have, by the record speed of which they are launching things, and also of which they are launching different targeting types, different formats, different attribution solutions. So there's so many things that for us it's incredibly important to really focus on the biggest topics which are relevant for you. So we'll start today's show with a very, very small quick survey, which I'm opening now, where you basically can just quickly select which topics you would like to hear more today, but also in the upcoming shows. So in the first question, you have the choice between sponsor products, sponsor brands, and sponsor display. Three of the key formats, which you can control with Amazon. And in the second section, you can select if you want to hear more about which operational topics you want to hear more about, right? So do you want to hear more about campaign structures, sophisticated structures? Do you want to talk more about auto versus manual targeting and strategies around that? Do you want to go deeper into keyword targeting strategies, ASIN targeting strategies, category targeting strategies? So all of this. Then we have keyword and product harvesting, which is a big topic in the industry. And then we have a couple of options here for you as well around bidding. So dynamic bidding, placement bidding, rule-based bidding, AI bidding. So all of this. I see that we have already many replying, and I will leave the survey up quite for a bit. And it seems that we have indeed interest in many topics, which I think is good, because some of these we actually will discuss today. So today we decided that we will talk about advanced PPC topics. So some of the last shows you probably have seen that we covered sometimes more basic topics, sometimes more advanced topics. So today we particularly actually decided to go again into some of the advanced topics. So Greg has prepared a couple of things, right? So the discussion we had is what are probably some of the coolest and nice strategies which you can now apply. And I personally think it's the best time to really think about this, because if you now think about the second half of the year, you think about all the big holidays coming up in Q4, which normally is such a huge opportunity. I think now is the best time to really think about what can you really do in advertising to unlock the potential. So let me quickly share my screen and we basically can jump in directly. So we go. Okay, Greg, you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Fantastic. So first, I already mentioned briefly who you are, but just do you want to add a little bit about the START acronym?
No, I think you kind of said it. We're on our 25th anniversary, started in search, grown into a performance media operation. We're just happy to be doing this for this long. I think companies getting to this point in their career is not that easy.
Cool. Then, yes, I think you guys are, and this I think also important for everyone that is listening in today. Acronym is one of the leading agencies out there working with some of the leading brands. So everything that we'll discuss today is pretty much, at the top of what you can really do in the advertising space. And starting with the first topic. So we said in the description of the show today that we'll cover 3 topics. And I think the first and most important surprise is we're actually covering 4. So very excited about this. And the first one we selected was portfolios, something which we haven't talked about in the past. So Greg, from your perspective, why is portfolios a very important thing for anyone that actually works within Amazon advertising?
I think if we're trying to talk about all the advanced things that you can do directly within the Amazon UI, portfolios is something that gives you a lot more flexibility with data analysis, making quick judgments based upon performance and trending behavior through the charts. And I think one of the things is when you get into it, it's what is your objective, right? Is it to understand what's going on in a product category or what's going on in profitability? If you set up your portfolios in a way that doesn't just create a one-to-one relationship with your campaign structure, but is more setting it up with these are these product categories, they're doing well all the way through sponsored brand, sponsored product, you have a lot more holistic understandings, which means you can do quicker analysis and have more strategic insights coming out. So if you do it by a product category, it allows you to measure quickly, but segment into relative categories, whether it's shoes, pants, tops, you start to see what are the trends in those categories. One area that we start to use it is, especially on the seller side, is if you can break them into profitability, right? So if you understand all the products you're selling based upon a margin level, you have different ACoS or ROAS goals, whichever ones you want to use. So if you can start seeing that this category that has a high margin has got a little bit lower of a ROAS, you're okay with that versus if you're looking at a holistic ROAS goal, because a higher margin, lower ROAS goal is still going to be more profitable than a lower margin with a higher ROAS goal. So those are always things that you want to understand in the segmentation about it. And I know it seems very simple and easy to use, but a lot of times when we're doing audits, people aren't using the portfolios. They're not using it for any strategic sense. And they'll occasionally have 1 or 2 in there, but they just don't use them as effectively as they could be.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fantastic opening point. So in some of the last shows, we talked a little bit about campaign structures and a couple of things you can do with campaign structures. But especially if you also follow some of the best practices out there, you very quickly will have many campaigns, and you will have many campaigns for the same product, the same ASIN. And having portfolios, or having anything that really helps you to group campaigns in a smart way can really make your life much easier. And particularly on the profitability topic, it's something which we touched on a little bit in the past. Greg, you just mentioned it. I think one of the big topics is there that most of the products have very different margins. And with that, they also should have very different ACoS goals. But still, one of the big things that we also see quite a lot in the industry, that advertisers, you just select one default ACoS goal, which they just think makes sense for them, 50%, 20%, 25%. And then they pretty much try to optimize against that, even if the margins per products are very different.
Yep. And I think one of the things that we work with brands is we try to illustrate to them ROAS or ACOS, it masks true performance. Whereas businesses are really after profit, right? Like high ROAS is fine, but understanding how to unlock the real potential and the real measurement is something that I think brands and advertisers need to look a little bit more at.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I think on the profitability piece, so we will have in one of the upcoming shows, we will have a dedicated show just about this topic. Because as Greg mentioned, I think, it's almost a science to really understand what is the exact right ACOS for your product, for your product category. How does this connect to all the fees that you pay in Amazon? Mm-hmm. Because it's not as straightforward, right, as many people think. If you really want to maximize the profit of your underlying business, one of the big important steps is to group by margins. And then you can also really work in a very organized way to maximize the profit overall. So one of the strategies which we highlight here is to use the Amazon portfolio function. There are, of course, also other functions which you can use if you use any software like Sellics that also helps you to group things. But the general idea here is really don't think about optimizing an account by just looking at all products are the same. Yep. Because for most advertisers, they're really not.
Especially when you get into multiple product categories.
Exactly. Cool. Okay, this is just as a starting point. I think it's important just to keep this in mind before we now jump into a specific formats and strategies there. But before we do this, I just want to do one thing, which we got some feedback the last time, which is before we now jump into sponsor products, brands, and display, to give everyone just a very quick reminder where they actually show up. Because this is a topic which I know that for some of you can be quite confusing. And the reason is because the names changed, the targeting option changed, new things launched, right? And now we talk all the time about sponsor products, sponsor brands, sponsor display. But I think sometimes it's just important to have one step back and really understand where all of these are actually showing up within Amazon. So we'll just give a very, very quick recap, because I think this will really help us now in the next three topics. So number one, I think most of you will be familiar with the sponsor products area. This is also the biggest one out of the three. And this is the one that has been there, I think, at least for sellers for the longest time. It's the most popular one. It normally shows up in the Amazon search results page. It also shows up in the product detail page. And normally you will always see this when you get this beautiful sponsored sign, right? So basically this is, I just searched here for PlayStation 4, right? And basically you can just scroll through the results and you will see always very clearly, okay, this is a sponsored product with a sponsored sign. You also will notice that it's very native, right? So most users will not even notice the difference. Is it really a sponsored product or not? The second thing, which you notice already on this page, is here actually at the top, right? Where you basically see a brand, where you see a shop in this case, and you also see a couple of products. This is when we will talk about sponsored brands, right? So sponsored brands can appear at the top. They can appear also on the side. They also can appear below at the end of the results page. But the key thing is that the format is different, right? So you can basically link to your own shop. You can also link to a product listing. And these are some great ways if you also really want to push and highlight your brand and basically the experience. So that's what you see here. So these are the two main formats. If you're really interested about showing up at the Amazon search results page, these are the two key things that you really need to keep in mind. But then there's the second very important page where most of the action is happening. And this is the product detail page. So on that page, I think also something that most people or most users are right now not really aware, that you can see all three formats: sponsor products, sponsor brands, and sponsor display on that page. So I just opened up one, just clicked on here, the PlayStation. You basically will not see always all three, especially not if you're in Germany, but you will definitely see almost all the time sponsor products, which is the traditional thing. And in many cases, you will also see here at the top the sponsor brands unit and a sponsor display unit at the right side next to the buy box. So if you think about this, this is the moment where people or where users, consumers make the buying decision, and you can access this placement with pretty much all the three formats, which are from a format perspective and target perspective slightly different. And we'll talk a little bit about this. But I think just from understanding perspective, this is very important to remember. So when we now will talk about all of the three formats, two of them, sponsor products and sponsor brands, appear at the Amazon search results page, and all three of them actually can appear on the product detail page. Greg, anything to add here on this?
The only thing I'll say is sponsored brand is starting to bleed into sponsored product locations as well.
Yeah, I think this is also something like this. This view, basically, we almost need to update it regularly because Amazon is changing also where they show up. But I think it's just important to keep this in mind. Before we now jump into the first section where we basically will talk about sponsored products, I just want to quickly remind everyone. So we're also monitoring the chat, so you don't need to wait until we're at the end of the session. If you have any questions throughout the session, just drop them, and Greg and I will try to answer them as quickly and as good as we can. But let's start probably with sponsored products first. So what would you say, Greg, is one of the biggest topics, advanced topics here?
I think it's also setting it up and finding the right balance in your structure, right? I think a lot of times the easiest thing when you get into this is auto seems the most easiest, right? You don't know the keywords you need, you don't know how keyword structures are, so let's just pick a bid, let's just slap it on and let's move down the road. That leads to a lot of lack of optimizations, lack of efficiencies, lack of structure. So what we try to break our accounts into is actually three structures for sponsored product, right? It's a discover, it's a dominate, and it's product targeting. Within those three buckets, we find that we have the ability to create more leverage for scalability, growth, and even to some degree, a little bit of conquesting at the same time, right? So the one thing I'll say is now that ad groups actually exist on both the seller and the vendor side, make sure you're using your ad groups when you do this. Make sure you're segmenting them by ASIN level so you can have the most efficient performance at each ASIN level. I think if you start with discovery or the auto campaigns, this is about discovering keywords that you didn't think about in your structure or has a little bit of inconsistent performance. It might not convert every day. It might convert only once every couple months. But make sure you break them into ad groups. Make sure you're refining negatives based upon two things. One is poor relevance. So if it doesn't matter to your product, it should be a negative keyword. The other one that should really be added as a negative is promoted keywords. And those are your manual keywords. You don't want to have cannibalization between your auto and your manual. So always use exact match keyword negatives in your auto for anything that's in your manual campaign structure, so you have the most efficient use of controls. Once you kind of move over into that manual side, you're making sure you target each ASIN with the keywords that converted in auto. You want to take those learnings and move them over. If you don't, you've lost a lot of those efficiencies and scalabilities. And obviously along the way, you're just adjusting to ensure an ideal combination of profitability, reach, and ROAS. Product targeting, which we talked about, ends up more on the PDP pages. You can do this for category targeting for learning, right? So we like to manually control which ASINs we're showing for, but new ASINs are coming in. Brands are pausing old ASINs and renaming them for review purposes all the time. So always using a category targeting is important. It'll never be the most efficient as manually targeting. So that's why we recommend a small bid in this area, so you can get the learnings and almost use product targeting in the same way that we're talking about using auto and manual campaigns.
Perfect, correct. I think already on this slide, but I think we have many touch points, which we can cover here. But before I do a quick recap, I will actually check the questions because I saw we have some first ones. So Mihir is asking, do we have a campaign quality score that Amazon algorithm takes into account?
They'll say they haven't. I think more what they're paying attention to is revenue velocity to a degree. I think that's always going to be an important factor for an online department store, kind of like how Amazon behaves.
Yeah, I think it's a question here, which I think everyone that has worked in the Google world, right, with Google AdWords on that space, will be very, very familiar with. It's basically the context for everyone that is not so familiar with the Google world. One of the big things that you need to keep in mind when you optimize on the Google side is the quality score, which is pretty much a summary of how relevant your ads are, which looks at click-through rate and a couple of other things. And even if Amazon has never really, let's say, made any big public official deep dive communications how exactly the auction works, I think the principles are the same, right? So I think really ensuring that the relevance of your ad is matching the need of the consumer who is searching for something is key. And click-through rate is one of the metrics which definitely will play a role, but also, of course, conversion rate and other metrics which are just very good for Amazon to understand, are you actually relevant for the consumer?
Exactly. They have less transactional needs than, say, a Google, which is more informational based.
Yeah. Cool. So agreeing to New Delhi, me here. Then we have a question from Joe. When creating manual campaigns, do you create all 3 match types in one ad group? That's also an evergreen topic, right? So how many match types per ad group, or should we even use all match types? What is your take on that?
I think it's kind of, I used to be a big fan of what I refer to as mirror match. That's what I call ad groups or campaigns by match type. Google, we moved away from that because of how Google now deals with variations, but Amazon is still that way where you can use the mirror match structure for a little bit. We know exact match is going to drive a higher ROAS, so you can have more aggressive bids and you can even put them in their own campaign, which allows you to control more budget and allow you to flow that through there. So I would definitely recommend, if you have don't have a complex campaign structure already, using it. But if you're already dealing with like 1,000 campaigns for some advertisers that we deal with, it might not be as feasible. So it's kind of what fits your kind of current structure without creating chaos in it.
Yeah, I agree. I think also one thing to add on this, Joe, I think what we normally also always recommend is have broad and exact if possible, right? If you have enough demand, try to keep them separate just to control them. Exact normally is really a most targeted way, and broad basically is still where you have a little bit of broader reach, and you still can also have discovery at least to a small degree, right? So exact should always be the real best performing ones, which do really work. But as Greg said, it really also depends on how much scope do you have for optimization, how many products do you have, how many campaigns, ad groups do you have, right? All of this. But normally all of this is possible.
Phrase match is like that match type that everyone just doesn't use that much. It's exact or broad match.
I agree. I think phrase is something which, in Google it was relatively popular, but in the Amazon world, it's not so popular anymore. And because you can mostly, it's already such a controlled space in terms of keyword sets, right? So in Google, you always had the problem that people could search for random things and you would show up. But in Amazon, you're so much already in this shopping world that phrase normally is not significantly different from broad in this case. So we hope that this answered that question, Joe, right? So if we really want to have full control, split them up. If you want to have more simplicity, I think it's also definitely okay to have them together. Then the next question from Jennifer. How do you target competitor ASINs?
So obviously this comes from and I know there's another question around category targeting. So if you use category targeting, you start to see ASINs in your search term report. It'll always start with a B usually, especially in the US. And that's how we identify the ASINs that we want to go after. We have some clients that are very big after going after their competitors. So it's just within the setting and making sure that you have the ability to select the products of where you want to show up. And then when you do that, just keep in mind that there's 2 ideas. And we'll talk a little bit about this in sponsored display. There's defense or conquesting. Sometimes you just like to show up on your own products because you don't want anyone coming in and getting any more page views.
Yeah, and if you also wanna hear more about this, Jennifer, as well as Joe, right? I think Joe also was a question about category targeting. So in episode 14, which we had with Destiny 2 weeks back, one of the big focus topics was actually product targeting. And as Greg said, one of the big use cases when we think about product targeting is in the end to have very sophisticated conquesting or competitor strategies, really understanding who are your main competitors, and then being very, very specific about them and targeting the product detail pages. And you can do this then with ASIN / with product targeting, but you can also use category targeting, because you can also refine the category in different ways with ratings, with price, with brands. You can also ensure that you really target only, let's say, brands that are competitive to you, which probably have a worse rating than you or worse price, and also use that to come up with new ASINs, as Greg just pointed out. So many questions. I see, this always normally what Greg happens, right? If the first one asks the questions, the ice seems to break, right?
So I'm not first.
Yeah. I will try to quickly double check what else we have. Thomas doesn't like your audio, but I think it's relatively okay. Right? Yeah, they're better ones. But let's see if we have what is Rolando saying. When doing negative keyword, do you only use negative exact? And when do you use negative phrase for auto and manual campaigns?
So I use exact the most because it's query based, right? So your intent changes based upon the parsing and the phrasing of how you use words, just how the language works. So we use a lot of exact match, almost always exact match. However, there are times where it's the sequence of a word, a couple words can change the meaning, and sometimes we want to be in that sequence, and sometimes as part of that a version of that sequence we don't want to be in. When we get into that type of parsing of words and phrasing, that's when we tend to use phrase match. We almost never use broad match negative keywords.
Yeah, I think that's also the most, let's say, familiar best practice in the market. Exact negative, I think, is the best way. Everything else can also cause some damage, which you probably do not.
And that's, yeah, I feel like a lot of people that get into like using phrase and broad match early end up going, where's all my popular search term going? And they didn't realize they got rid of all their good keywords in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think with negative keywords, so as also Greg points out here in the discover area, it's probably one of the most important aspects to really get your auto campaigns work, but use it wisely. So definitely recommended to use exact, except you really know what you do, because otherwise there's just the danger that you really cause some damage with that. Many questions. Then we have the next one. Johannes is asking, hi guys, I hear of some Amazon ad agencies using one keyword per campaign and ending up with 100s or 1000s of campaigns. Yes. What's your opinion on fine-tuning to such a degree versus what the actual payoff is?
I am not one of those agencies. I don't like using that structure. I think it creates too much complexity and chaos, especially if you're doing everything within the Amazon UI yourself. If you have a third party dealing with a lot of automation or machine learning, I can see it because you can allow the machines to deal with it. But trying to have a human intervene and deal with that scale, it's just not possible to catch anything that might be going wrong with your campaign structure. And inadvertently, you can cause certain keywords or ASINs to get paused. And there's a lot of campaigns to go through to confirm that all of your ASINs are firing properly. It's not something, unless you have like a sophisticated structure, that I would recommend.
Yeah. Yeah, I can just fully agree on that statement. I think it really depends, as Greg points out. I think we have the question: do you want to optimize this yourself, or do you have a big algorithm that really works with this? A machine can easily work with 1000s or 10,000s of campaigns, and normally they're also structured in such a way that the algorithm can work well with them. But if you do this mostly manually, then it's a little bit trickier. So I see that what I think, first of all, thanks so much everyone for this huge amount of questions. And also, Thomas, apologies also for sometimes the audio quality. We always, of course, try, in these live shows to keep video, audio quality, everything as great as possible. But as you notice with all of these questions, it is a live show. So we always will have certain issues, which we, however, will always try to improve. And we have another 10, 20 questions already. So what I would just suggest for now, we will just move on to sponsored brands. And then we we'll come back to questions, then sponsored display, and then we will also come back to all the questions. Thanks, Gareth. Audio is fine with them, and I think also the rest. So yeah, it's great. Okay, so lots of interaction, love it. But yeah, let's first continue. And no worries, we come back to the questions very, very, very shortly. But let's talk first a little bit about sponsored brands.
Yeah. So sponsored brand is where Amazon's spending a lot of time trying to find new formats and find ways to get advertisers to invest more. Typically, we see about 90 to 95% coming from sponsored product, but over the last few months, it's really grown in sponsored brand. It's because they're doing a lot of new things. Sponsored brand formats like the video or even the lifestyle image are coming. I think the things that, if we're not talking about anything that's on this slide, is you want to make sure that this is an ad type that you're using all your best products for. 4.5 stars is always ideal, but anything over 3.5 will work. When you're dealing with lifestyle images or videos, you want to be very careful right now of your audience and the crises they're facing. You'll notice that the lifestyle image on the left has nothing to do with society right now versus the video is some people playing outside. If you had lifestyle images right now at a bar scene, it would not go over too well. So keep in mind the current circumstances like COVID that's kind of going on. But we are finding out with these new formats, sponsored brand video, while it's a brand type, is within your sponsored product feed actually. So when you're scrolling through, it's very eye-catching. So if you have this type of capability to have video for your products, your nice 30 seconds, this is a great time to use it because as people are scrolling down their phone, it stops them every time. Even I'm used to these, and every time I'm looking for something to purchase, I get stopped by them. So it's definitely something to recommend, and it usually actually has the highest ROAS for us. It's better than sponsored brand or even sponsored product traditional for us. And then this is just more ways to cover the SERP results. We talk about how littered with advertising Amazon has become on a SERP result. The more space that you can occupy, it's the better in building out your audiences for sponsored display remarketing or even DSP remarketing.
Yeah, I think that's it's a fascinating topic, right, Greg? I mean, if we think back about the sponsored brands, and also if we just what we've seen when we looked at the search results page, when we looked also at the product listing page, yes, sponsored brands was slightly different than sponsored products, right? But it appeared almost at the same locations. It was a little bit different, but still, for the normal consumer, it was probably not that easy to really differentiate, oh, this is now a brand format, this is now a product format, right? This is now changing, right? If I now look at this and I see videos, I see like real images, this fully opens up a full new world.
No, it definitely does. And I just feel like everyone just stops on them now. But you're seeing the majority of them are on mobile. And I'm just hoping that as more people adopt, we'll get more inventory because it still has its limitations on impressions it gets because of the inventory Amazon is skewing that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also one thing which I just can also recommend everyone that already uses sponsor brands, right? I think sponsor brands is definitely something which is not that popular yet, compared to sponsor products, but it's something which definitely is growing, and Amazon is investing a lot in this, right? That's why we see this here, and especially if you have like these new formats, for example, images or videos, and you have also the capabilities and of course the right products where videos and images can work. Then this is something definitely worth trying out. As Greg mentioned, some of these things are new. There's not such a strong competition, and you have potentially great chances to be very successful here.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I'll put is sponsored brand is a very competitive ad type because of the limited inventory. So make sure you're using this for your best products.
Yeah, I think that's another fair point. It's not something which you should probably try with 100 products directly.
Yeah.
Which already comes to some direct questions on this, right? So I will try to address two questions which are not very specifically about these topics. So we have Jason. Welcome, Jason. Also, we're testing the new sponsor brand video ads. Is there a way to better refine keyword bids on these? Any way to find suggested bids as they are not currently included?
They don't include the suggested bid, but it's one of those things where it's like a trial and error. I would actually recommend using more of like a sponsored products learning for what bids work for you the best. They play a lot different, while they call it sponsored brand, they perform similar to sponsored products. So using that type of logic in performance and trying to translate that over would be the area I would recommend to continue.
Cool. And yeah, one follow-up question, I think, from Rolando. You mentioned video ads for sponsored brands. Can you provide more insights with your experience? Are conversion and ACoS lower versus other formats?
Yep. So we've been testing sponsored brand videos since it was in the beta phase. I think the only negative I have, and I'll go back to it, is the impression volume. They kind of do limit the inventory that they use for this. However, it has always had our best ACoS or ROAS, so low ACoS, high ROAS, good conversion rate. And I think it goes to because you're using your best products and it's kind of eye-catching. So this is something to where I think it has the most efficient use for brands moving forward.
Perfect. And yeah, Garrett is asking an interesting question. So where are the questions you mentioned? I only see my text here. Yes, in Zoom, there is a function. If you post a question, you can select if you want that everyone sees the question or just basically the moderators, in this case, Greg and myself. So Gareth, you're, for example, writing to everyone, which I think is also a good thing to do. But there are also many others asking questions directly targeted to Greg and me. But of course, everyone, feel free also to open up the questions that everyone can see them. Otherwise, we will just continue to repeat them. Okay, there are a couple of other topics, but I don't see, yeah, this is a lot of technology for an oldie like me. Yeah, it's, I think, the COVID-19 phase has brought us all more towards this. But yeah, I think there are a couple of other questions, oldies, goldie. There are a couple of other questions which we will address again later, but I just want to ensure that we have some of the first ones. And also for those that are asking questions in the Q&A function, don't worry, they're not forgotten as well, right? So we also will address them, because I also see that a couple of questions are coming in via the chat. A couple of questions are coming in via the official Q&A function. But before we do this, because I'm always also really want to be sensitive of the time of everyone joining the show. Let's quickly jump to sponsored display, Greg. So what is your current take on sponsored display and advanced strategies here?
I think one thing is sponsored display is kind of used within the search ad types, but it's not. One of the things is a lot of its advertisers abandon it because they don't see the right ACoS ROAS goal that they want. It's usually not as good as the other two formats. But I think what needs to happen is brands and advertisers need to adjust their goals as they move forward, and expect that and understand how that fits within their overall marketing objective, right? So sponsored display right now mainly gets used for audiences, which is good. You want your remarketing unless you're using like a DSP. But if you use the interest base or the category base, it's definitely a way to kind of fuel all that audience data of who's coming to your pages, who might be of interest, and especially who's interested in your category, because oftentimes these ads are showing up on your category. So this is where it kind of goes back to the product targeting, again, identifying who your top competitors are. If you don't have market research data or things like that, the easy hacks in are use Amazon's bestseller rankings to figure out who the top products in your category are. Google your main head term. I mean, Amazon your main head term. I guess that term's become synonymous with Xerox. Find out who the top ranking products are. If you have access to brand analytics, you can also find out who are the most likely to get the clicks for each of your main search terms. So start from there to identify who your top competitors are. More importantly, what are their top products in this space? From there, make sure you understand your goal. Is it to increase page views for remarketing purposes? Is it to conquest competitors? Is it to steer traffic to your top ASINs? Or is it with products with mediocre reviews that you might not want to have on a SERP page and you're trying to get more interest in?
Yeah, many things covered here, Greg. Thank you. I think when we think about sponsored display, there's this interesting point of it, right? So basically, initially, most thought about sponsored display. Okay, this is audience targeting, it's remarketing, it's off Amazon, and this is what also I think many tried out. But now, what's something that in the industry gets also more and more popular is to understand what we have seen when we looked at the formats before, right? So that basically sponsored display can show up in this very beautiful, amazing place here, right next to the buy box, which is generally amazing, right? Because you're really there, someone wants to make already a decision almost, right? But there you are, and trying to see if someone wants to change. And combined with these strategies here, so that you basically also have the possibility with sponsored display to target ASINs and not only audiences, right? I think this is now something which opens up such a big set of strategies, which I think we have some here, and we don't have enough time today to cover all of them in depth. But I think the key message, I think, for also everyone in the audience is there are many things you can do with sponsored display, right? It's not something which, you should just say, okay, it's not relevant for me. I tried it once and now it's done, right? It is with all the formats of Amazon. They really try to make them better. They try to improve them. And in some cases, some might not even be aware that this is sponsored display, because it to a certain degree sometimes look like sponsored products.
No, totally agree. And I think the other part is, as you say, they've gone to offsite remarketing and things like that, but there's ways to fuel using Amazon's first party data of getting those page views to start kind of fueling that prospecting for your remarketing campaign as well.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, now I think we will have a couple of more minutes to cover questions. And I really like the last comment from Nancy, which wrote, can we expect a second part of the sessions? Really enjoying this so far. Don't want it to end soon. Yeah, thank you, Nancy. Appreciate that feedback, right? So we, of course, love to hear that these discussions are very valuable for you. There's so many topics, right, we can discuss. And I also fully understand that we cannot cover everything in 1 hour. So we always try to select the topics that we want to go deeper into very selectively. And of course, there's a good chance that Greg one day might come back to us, right? And then we'll continue. But before we do this, we have still some time to cover some of the questions which we got. I will now jump actually to the Q&A because I don't want that everyone feels avoided there, because that's not our intention. So let's start at the top. So my campaigns, auto and manual for a certain product, were converting a lot of sales, but we run out of inventory. And because of COVID, we were out of stock for about 3 weeks. My inventory came in recently, but now my campaigns aren't getting as many impressions and clicks as before. Any advice on that, Greg?
I think some of this comes back to going back to that revenue velocity. You've lost that gap and you got to restart. It's unfortunate. You got to bid up a little bit. The other thing I'll say with it is, if you know you have inventory issues coming up, slow down a little bit on your bids and how much you're showing up, because your products might naturally run out of stock on their own without the advertising dollars. And this allows you to gain that surplus of stock so you can start advertising again.
Yes, I think that's, it's one of the more complicated issues.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, there's unfortunately also, best of my knowledge, no easy fix to this. And it also comes back to the question on quality score and histories of campaigns and all of this, right? So of course, I think the big advice here is always trying not to stop campaigns if not really required. But of course, sometimes it happens, as with the inventory and with COVID-19.
Yeah, we noticed when there was no like date range format and we were stopping and starting campaigns, there was always a slow start. Like you got penalized for not consistently in advertising or driving the revenue from an old campaign. So that's where I know Amazon won't acknowledge the revenue velocity part, but it does seem to peek its head through a lot.
Yeah. And one thing which we haven't at least tested yet, but one thing which I know is a strategy which sometimes can work is basically, if you restart your campaign, definitely try to start with slightly higher CPCs, right? Mm-hmm. And not lower CPCs. So some try, some make the mistake that they start at the same level, or they actually even decrease the bids. And basically in the beginning, in order for the campaign to again keep traction and actually build something that Amazon can work with, always a little bit higher can be better than lower.
Yep.
Then we have a next question from Ishin. What is the correct manual campaign ad strategy when I have just launched a new product variation, different color? Do I create an entirely new campaign per variation?
I don't think I would create a new campaign per variation. I think this is where I would use ad groups and structure my ad groups and have their permutations follow through. Make sure that the colors are used as a negative keyword. This is where you could probably get away with like a phrase match negative, and make sure that those are there. So the correct color is blue is not showing up for a green product. I would probably use ad groups and negative keywords for here, because the campaigns is again going to create scale that you might not want.
fully agreed. I hope this addresses your questions, Ishan. Then we have Jacob. What's the difference in product placement when you put an ASIN in a product targeting campaign versus putting the same exact ASIN in a keyword targeting campaign?
If we're talking about sponsored product, it's going to end up being in the same area anyway. So you're talking about the same thing. Amazon still has a few bugs in how it kind of deciphers everything, but it's gotten better. Like we were joking around earlier, they now have a date range, so we're happy about that.
And the search terms, right? So many cool new things in sponsored brands, so that's great. But yeah, let's continue. We have here another question from Jacob. So, do you know for what searches will my product come up if I target the ASIN via keyword targeting? I think that's what we just discussed. And I think the second question was also from Jacob. And if I'm trying to isolate product placement to the product detail page on specific ASINs, what strategies would you suggest to maximize this placement?
Where I would be more focused on using I think they're referring to it as product targeting attribution or product attribution targeting, and using that, and that's going to show up more in sponsored products. This used to be a feature that auto did naturally, but now it's a version within manual that you can control now, especially on the vendor side.
Yes, I think that's one thing, right? So I think directly targeting it. The second thing is also placement bid adjustments. Right? So there's also the option that you can adjust bids, placements, especially within sponsored products on the campaign level, and you also have a certain degree of control there that you can do. Then we had a question of Dibyayit who asked, can I add A+ content for books?
I don't think you can. I haven't done much book advertising, to be honest, but I have done research in this, and I don't think they do have A+ content.
Yeah, I think so too, but I'm also not 100% sure, I have to say. Okay, then we have Hailey is asking, is Sponsor Brands video available in Canada?
I know it's available in the US. It's obviously where the majority of our advertising is, and they do release things slowly. If it is in Canada, my guess is it's probably in beta mode right now.
Yeah, I think so too. I also cannot 100% verify, but normally if something goes live in the US, Canada follows very soon. So if it hasn't followed, I would guess it will be there. And
video came out of beta, I want to say a few months ago. So if I would assume it's at least in Canada in beta format.
Yeah. Ishan is asking, how should I split up product variations and manual product ad campaigns? Different colors. I think we had this already.
Yep.
So these were these ones. And now let's jump back to the chat. Ishan, thank you. Love to hear that. And let's now jump to the questions above. Again, we don't skip any questions, so don't worry with this. So where were we? We had we had the many campaigns questions, which we covered. Then we had, is it fine to have the same keyword in different ad groups?
I think it's fine. I think as long as you're putting them in ad groups where it makes sense for the keyword to be. I would also make sure that you understand prioritization. So this is where marking your campaigns with high, medium, or low type of priorities in it to understand if you're going to use a keyword multiple times, especially in sponsored product, it's fine because you have 6, 7 ad slots that you can show up for. Just make sure that you're using a bidding structure that kind of makes sense, right? So if you have a poor product that you want to share a same keyword with, it shouldn't have your highest bid. You want to put your best foot forward with your best product.
Yep, I think I agree. Let me just quickly stop sharing for now and come back to the question. So generally, I think, I'm the view that also we from Sellics have is, as Greg said, it doesn't create too much damage, but if you have the chance, of course, it makes it a little bit clearer and also easier for you to optimize if you don't have this, this situation. Where do I have the chat now? Because I just stopped sharing and the chat disappeared. Here we have the chat. Oh, there's the chat. Okay, and we have the chat again. So let me quickly open it up. So don't worry, so we don't forget any question. So the A+ content question we already covered. And before that, we had from Jason, what are success or downturn our brands seeing on Amazon PPC during COVID-19 times? Very good question. What do you think about this, Greg?
I think it depends on the category. So we work heavily, as you saw in an earlier slide, in the lawn and garden category. I think as financial times hit, people take on their more projects. So categories like that have done well. Home office equipment's done well. I definitely think we've seen like apparel not be the best category unless you're only selling tops. People aren't really buying pants right now, which is kind of one of those interesting facts. But I think the majority of the areas that have been hit is like apparel or even luxury categories. I think people aren't using discretionary income on luxury right now or clothing.
Yeah. Okay. So we hope that this gives some color on this, but also if you're interested, I just want to give probably a quick look if you're interested in that question. Particularly, so let me just quickly share my screen again. So there is also the chance, right? So if you basically want to know more about the impact of COVID-19 also on advertising, what Sellics is doing, you have here at the top the COVID-19 Center. And in this center, we also try to summarize up all kind of different analysis and understanding. And one of the big topics, which we of course talk about, is how is the impact on overall Amazon, but how is also the impact on specifically advertising. And particularly with advertising, we're actually doing right now a very deep analysis of what's happened in the last 5 months per category, and also what will likely happen in the next 5 months when we think about the holiday season. So stay tuned on the results there, because we covered this in one of the upcoming shows. But in a nutshell, I think at least the first results are indicating that right now is one of the best times ever to start with advertising, because overall in most categories we see very, very good CPC and ACoS developments. Just as CPCs overall have dropped, but conversion rates increased, which essentially leads to better ACoSs for many, many out there. But stay tuned, as Greg mentioned, this also depends a lot on the different categories. So we're also looking at all of this and trying to give a little bit more light there. But it's one of the bigger topics which we also will hear very soon. But here you also see some of
I was surprised to see the toy category not booming as much as video games.
Yeah, I think the key reason that we identified for that is the children stayed at home. And one of the big challenges that parents had is to keep the children busy, because they were not going to school anymore. So many of the toys and games in that category actually benefit a lot from it. But that's just a very quick outlook on that one. But we'll have a dedicated deep dive on the full COVID-19, and what you can learn from this also now for the holiday season, which is already at the horizon. Let's continue with the questions. We touched on that one from Jason. We touched on that one from Rolando. We touched on Roberts. We haven't touched on yet. Any recommendations for software to create sponsored videos?
I think this is just kind of what you feel comfortable with everything you got going on with costs and financials. So we have our own in-house creative teams that we work with. So I am not the video expert on this. I think it's just making sure that the video software is affordable for yourself and can spit out the ad types and specs that the format requires.
Yeah. And I think it's also something which we will also probably follow up on, because this is also a question which came up a couple of times. I think, videos, of course, sound great, but then you always have the problem with creating great videos. And this seems to be definitely a need, which we also will try to address specifically in one of the upcoming shows. So also thanks for raising this again. Joe is asking, where are the best products to identify for retargeting off of Amazon? Does it make sense to have all items and weed out the low performing ones?
So is the question how to research products or which products to advertise?
I think, what are the products to advertise for retargeting of Amazon?
I definitely would put your best products forward, right? You don't want to put everything forward until you have a well-established game plan. So understand what is your objective. So I would, obviously, if it's always revenue and you're building in with those types of products on sponsored display and product category, I would definitely recommend it. But then there's other questions: are you trying to sell through inventory? Are you trying to get some reviews? Those are the secondary questions, but I would always say top products first.
Yeah, fully agreed. The more you pretty much go outside of Amazon and the more you go outside of the mindset of anyone to really buying something, the more important it is that you just keep in mind that performance might drop. And in doubt, always start with your best performers. These are the most likely ones that will succeed, and then you can still expand. But if you're conscious of your budget, right, this is definitely something which is recommended. Bill Edelman, welcome. How often should you adjust bids? Day, week, hourly? What's Greg, something that you would suggest?
I would say it's volume based, actually. Not. I definitely would say never do it intraday. Don't do it in the same day unless something's run amok and you've caught it randomly. But then when you start talking about is it daily, weekly, it comes to how many impressions are those keywords getting. If you're only getting 10 or 20 impressions, you don't want to adjust it because you haven't had enough data. I would always use a barometer of around like 1,000 impressions before you would even think about changing your bids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, but as I say, Greg, I think it's always, this question comes up many times. It's also, I think, an evergreen question. And I think looking at it from a different angle is spot on, as you say, right? I think the time is not even so much a question, it's more the volume, right? Do we have enough statistical data and to really make that call? The good news on this is that there are solutions, right, also out there. So of course you can do manual bidding, and we also will have also in the next couple of weeks at least one session that really goes deep into bidding optimization strategies. But one of the things which you can also do very easily is to automate bidding. So there are different automated bidding solutions. They are the one that you can use from Amazon, which we also will then cover in that webinar, but they're also the ones that you can use with Sellics. So Sellics has rule-based automation. Sellics also has AI-based automation, but both kind of like also require some data because, of course, without any data, in the end, even machines cannot basically do the changes. And then if a change happens daily, hourly, weekly, depends in the end on the volume. But
and I think that's the dream. The dream is to have the machine deal with the automations and you work on your strategic input.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let me just quickly I think, Bill, if you're more interested in that one, let me just also quickly share this. So basically, if you also go again to Sellics, there's this beautiful also part here at the top, advertising. And here is basically the topic. If you're more interested in AI automation, you can check out here. This is full automation. And there's also rule-based automation, which you will see if you go to the general advertising offering. And both in the end can really answer this question for you, right? So here what you in the end can pretty much say, bidding rules, it basically will change the bids after specific volume thresholds have been hit, right? So this is essentially the idea. And this is something that you can just also set up easily. But of course, you can also do this manually. But I would say most are recommended to do this at some point automatically. I think otherwise it's just in any reasonable account very difficult to do.
Yep.
Johannes, great webinar again, and also welcome back, Johannes. I've noticed that you visited many of the STL shows in the last couple of weeks, so highly appreciate that. Would love to see one diving into international expansion, how international ad marketplaces work differently, and how to create sales velocity when entering new countries. That is a great point. I think there is a lot of content that just touches on exactly this part, right? So how to scale globally. Looking at the time, we definitely don't have enough time to cover this in depth. But Greg,
you need an hour for that conversation.
Yeah. Any quick one on this?
No, I think this is always going to come down to where do you have inventory? What's the logistics that go into it? But I would definitely say if you have the ability to start scaling into it in the infrastructure for supply and logistics, I would start paying attention to your new products, building that revenue velocity, and then working down the chain, kind of how you did in your first country.
Yeah, but yeah, Johannes, you are a loyal visitor, and you're coming back, so we definitely will think about how we can make a dedicated session for this. So really appreciate also the feedback here. I know we're out of time, and I think we have a couple of questions. So what I will just do now, I will give a very, very quick, we play the game, max 10 seconds per questions, Greg, right? So we're picking up very fast. And if we kind of like want to have any more details, you can always reach out to us via social, via any of the channels. and we'll come back to you. But Rolando was asking, so what should you do when you run out of stock with your campaigns? You mentioned to decrease the budget, but what should you do after the inventory is gone? Pause, leave it running. Any changes to recommend?
I think this goes back to, I think the situation, I would pause it at that point, but this goes back where if you know you have low inventory, I would slow down my advertising going into it to give you an opportunity to get more supplies in stock.
Yes, absolutely. Perfect. Then the next one, Ishin, you are the best. Love to hear that. Thanks so much. Love that you find it insightful. Thomas was asking, probably way too early, but any insights into negative products in auto campaigns?
You can add from a negative products, like negativing out, just pausing them. I think that's just the ad group structure, right? You just pause the ad group and stop advertising it. I think negative keywords within that, I'm looking for poor relevance, right? So does it relate to the product or not? And if it doesn't, get rid of it.
Yeah, I think Thomas is referring to the negative products exactly. No new feature. Yes. So.
Yep.
Probably way too early, but inside negative products into auto campaigns.
Negative targeting, not showing up in search.
Yeah.
This is where targeting. Like why we're a bigger fan of like the manual targeting. You get a little bit more control, but yeah, it's still a little too early to figure out the best practice on that one.
Yeah, it's too early. It's just recently launched. So no, let's say result-driven KPIs yet, but generally totally makes sense, right? So I think it's definitely something which you should try to out. The same logic applies basically that we have there, but a little bit too early to really pinpoint this down with some data, but we will definitely try to do this as well. Gareth, I had to buy a lot of it for my grandkids. I was not know anymore what this was referring to, but
I think toys and games.
Ah, the toys. There we go. Yeah.
It always comes back to toys. We're always kids at heart.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It was the toys. Toys come out. Okay, cool. And then John, what is the best way of doing keyword research? So there are a couple of keyword tools out there. There's also one from Sellics, which is called Sonar, right? So if you haven't tried it out, just search for keyword research or search for Sonar, and you will figure it out there. But also, if this is a topic, and that's why we asked also before, which you want to hear more about, we also are planning to have a dedicated session only about keyword research, because this is also a big, huge topic when it really comes to coming up with the most insights. Okay, I think let me have a last quick check on the Q&A. I think we have almost the last. We have Ishin who asked the last question in the Q&A. If I have a high converting keyword as manual broad, should I stop the ad, move it to exact keywords? No. I'll keep the
never break up a good thing.
Never break up a good thing.
I'm not a big fan of like that, but if it's working and it's doing well, don't touch it.
Great. Okay, thanks, Gareth. Really love to hear that feedback. And we are already a little bit over time, but we wanted to use this time to ensure that we can cover everything. So I really want to say already now a big thank you to Greg.
Thank you for having me.
This has been a fantastic session. I think lots of great discussions, a lot of great questions. Really big thank you to everyone that joined today. Last thing before we finish, I'm opening up a very quick second survey, which will just give you the chance in 5 seconds to rate the session. And as soon as this will be done, we want to say a big thank you. This show will be also published on YouTube, right? It will be also on Spotify, podcast. If you have any other questions, any things, just feel free to comment there, reach out to us, and we always will be very happy. Greg, how can they reach you? The best way, if anyone has a direct follow-up question to you?
You can always reach me at gmanius@acronym.com. That's my work email, or you can send a request or message over on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone. And wherever you are, have a fantastic day. If you're in the US, have a fantastic night. If you're in India, have a fantastic evening. If you are in Europe, and we'd love to see you again at the next show. Thanks so much, everyone.